Out. And I will share my screen and we can get started. Is everyone able to see the screen here? All right, outstanding. So the topic for today is going to deal with emotional intelligence, and this is a relatively hot topic today. It's an emerging topic in business and professionalism. It's not specific to any major, right? So it doesn't matter what your major is. If you're in a STEM field, if you're in a non-STEM field, if you're in business, if you're in the arts, whatever it is. One of the things I love about this topic is that it's universally applicable. You could really look at the idea of emotional intelligence or EQ and use it across the board. So over the course of the next, again, 60 to 90 minutes, depending on how much Q&A we have, we're going to engage in that discussion, and we're going to talk a little bit about EQ and emotional intelligence from a cognitive standpoint, but then also practical application. And what the heck does all this cognitive science mean to me, and how can I apply that to help me advance in my professional career, no matter what path I take? So just a little bit about me. Once again, my name is Chris Fitzpatrick. I'm here in my capacity as the University Relations Manager with Crestron Electronics. I've been in talent acquisition a little over 15 years now in a variety of different areas, primarily focusing on campus recruiting, internship, co-op, and early talent programs. In addition to that, I work with diversity and inclusion, veteran recruitment and relationships, and I've worked with organizational development and community partnerships. So topics like interviewing and emotional intelligence, soft skills, that's kind of my bread and butter. This is what I look at across the board when I'm interviewing students for internships, or when we're taking a look at folks for careers or for internal advancement, not just what are the technical skills that they need to be prepared with and how we can develop those skills, but also the non-technical skills, those universal, those human skills, of which emotional intelligence is one of the most important. Again, a bunch of ways to keep in touch with me, and you'll find these links are also in that chat box. I will repost those links again at the end of the presentation, just in case anybody comes in late and isn't able to access them. This presentation will also be up on this YouTube channel, and I will send a follow-up message with that link for everybody who wants to go back and just liked it so darn much that you want to see it again, or you want to share it with your friends, which is perfectly acceptable. And again, once again, if anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn or on Instagram, I'm more than happy to. Okay. One other thing that I want to touch on is just about the relationship between Crestron Electronics and the University of Buffalo. And I've talked about how that's an emerging relationship and how we're gaining so much more traction with that relationship. And in that was the establishment of a scholarship very recently in honor of Crestron's late chief technology officer, Mr. Fred Bargetti. Fred was he was larger than life. The man was a legend in the industry, in our company, really across the entire AV landscape. And he graduated from the University of Buffalo with a degree in electrical engineering. He passed almost exactly a year ago after a bout with ALS. And in honor of Fred, the family that owns Crestron, we are a family-owned company, the family that owns Crestron established a scholarship in Fred's honor, and that is available. And I have the website down there below. I will also share that with everyone who signs in with us. I'm just admitting a couple people from the waiting room as well. So that is a little bit more about the relationship that exists between our company and your school, and why engaging with the student population is so important, just because we know firsthand how many terrific students there are at University of Buffalo. So going into the discussion about emotional intelligence, and we abbreviate that EQ, and part of the reason that we use EQ is because there's a juxtaposition against IQ, right? And the presentation itself is EQ is greater than IQ, and the idea is that while IQ is certainly very important, has its place, right? It's talking about the ability to learn new information, right? That intelligence quotient. EQ is a little bit harder to pin down. It's not something that you can necessarily test and get a numerical score to. EQ is constantly evolving. It's something that's very much within your scope to be able to change, to improve, and to work on and to work towards. But it's important to understand why emotional intelligence and why EQ is important. And right off the bat, a few statistics I'll share with you is that you see here 58% of performance in jobs can be linked directly to emotional intelligence, which means that somebody's ability to perform at a high level at their job, not just to be able to do their job at the baseline, but to be able to perform at a high level is tied to their ability in emotional intelligence and how they manage their emotional state. And we'll talk about the 4 dimensions of emotional intelligence in just a little while. But more than half of job performance is at least partially attributable to high levels or low levels of emotional intelligence. High levels of emotional intelligence you tend to see in very successful people in job performances, and the really interesting stories tend to come from the other side of the spectrum. You see 90% of high performers in the workplace are also high in EQ. There is a very clear correlation in individuals within an organization who are high in emotional intelligence, who also are considered the top performers within that organization. Conversely, 20% of low performers are also high in EQ. And what's interesting about this is you ask yourself, well, wait a second, that's the bottom fifth of an organization in terms of performance, but they're also high in EQ. How come they're not higher? And there could be a whole variety of reasons. And this is where you dive into leadership or you dive into company culture. And EQ alone is important, but it's not going to do the job by itself. Right? EQ is not going to be the only predictor of success. Yes, technical skills come into play and other non-technical, we call soft or human skills come into play. But an organization, a company also has to be in a position to be able to harness that skill and to be able to recognize somebody who possesses these skills and give them what they need in order to advance, in order to perform at their highest level. Otherwise, what you might get is this 20% of low performers who are high in EQ who might feel like their talents are being wasted, or who might not feel challenged, or might feel that they don't have rapport with their manager and don't feel empowered to be able to move forward. And then this one is my personal favorite, and generally students really take very close notice at this, and that is the income disparity for people with high emotional intelligence versus people with low emotional intelligence. And this is not a lifetime figure. It is not $29,000 over the course of a lifetime. There is a study that shows that individuals who scored high in emotional intelligence and demonstrated high EQ over a course of time averaged $29,000 more per year in gross earnings than individuals with low emotional intelligence. And there's a variety of reasons that we could identify why that might happen. It's possible that people with higher EQ tend to do better when the merit cycle comes along and may get better merit-based raises or increases in their pay. People with high emotional intelligence are often viewed as more promotable, or people that leadership views as somebody who might fit into a leadership role, a management role, or more of a subject matter expert role where they're influencing overall strategy. Does that make sense? Everyone good on that so far, right? So if I were to tell you, okay, so by listening to this information and by using some of the techniques that we'll talk about to strengthen EQ, you could average almost $30,000 more a year in earnings. Or you just use the raise hand button if that's something that sounds interesting to you. Think we're going to get most of you to say, all right, a lot of hands going up. I got some thumbs going up. Okay, yes, I would like to sign up for $30,000 more a year right off the bat. Outstanding. Okay, good. So you all have good priorities. I like that. So let's talk a little bit about emotions, right? Talking about emotional intelligence. Well, what emotions do we have? And I'm going to ask you to open up the chat boxes for this one. How many emotions do you think we have? Put a number in the chat box. Toss it in there. How many emotions do you think we have? How many emotions are we capable of? You can give me a number. You can give me a narrative answer. Open up that chat box and toss it in. Let's see what everyone says. A lot. 4, 10, 9, infinite. Okay, so we're really running the gamut here. Vanessa says 2. Sydney says 5. Now, you saw on one of my early slides, right? I think of myself as a bit of a game show fanatic. So we're kind of doing a Price is Right thing here, right? Where if you go over, you lose your showcase, right? Sydney, I see Sydney Merritt here. Sydney, I don't know if you're a Price is Right fan, but I don't know if you realize, but if somebody gets the answer exactly right, they usually win an additional prize. Now, I don't have any prizes today other than my undying admiration. But Sydney hits it on the nose here with her answer of 5. And a lot of you might think, especially if you said hundreds or infinite or anything like that, is like, I feel so many more than 5 emotions. Well, the idea behind it is that there are 5 baseline emotions. And what we actually feel are different intensities of these emotions. The 5 baseline emotions are happy, sad, angry, afraid, and ashamed, right? I think that makes a fair amount of sense, right? I think we've all felt these emotions at some time or another. We've all felt happy before. We understand what it means when you say I'm happy. Maybe you just listen to a lot of Pharrell Williams songs and that one comes on and it kind of gets you moving, right? But within happy, you see a couple dozen different levels to that emotion. And these are the feelings I hope you're all having by being in this presentation right now, right? So a low intensity of happiness. I think a lot of us are probably feeling glad right now. We're feeling pleasant. I don't know how many of us are feeling tender. Again, I didn't write the list, but it's on there. Maybe we're pleased, or maybe there's a slightly higher level of happiness in the room right now. Maybe some of us are cheerful. Maybe some of us just feel good, and that's how you would describe yourself. Perhaps we are glowing. I love that one. It's like I'm glowing right now. Nobody ever says that when I ask them how they're doing, by the way. It's interesting. And some of my coworkers can hear me giving this presentation right now, and I'm hoping that one of them, when I ask them how their weekend was, I hope they tell me that it was glowing next week. And then you get that really high intensity of happiness, right? Elated, excited, overjoyed, thrilled, exuberant. And these are feelings that we feel, I mean, very high intensity feelings that usually come when there's some major event or something that's very positive that happens to us. Same thing with sadness, right? When we feel sad, there can be a light level, a low intensity sadness where we just feel unhappy. Maybe we describe ourselves as moody. Maybe we're disappointed or we're dissatisfied. Something just didn't quite go our way. It's not bothering us. We're not going to let it ruin our day, but it's on our minds. And then you go up to a slightly higher intensity of sadness and you see heartbroken, distressed, melancholy, right? A different level of that sadness emotion, but still in that same bucket. And then when you get into the really high level of sad emotions, right? You see depressed, alone, dejected, hopeless. I mean, again, those are really high level feelings. And this exists in each of these 5 different buckets, right? Happy, sad, angry, afraid, and ashamed. Now, why is this so important? Why is it important to think of 5 major categories of emotions, but then to also consider the intensities? This is one of the baseline skills and techniques within emotional intelligence. And we're going to talk a lot about this, and that's self awareness, right? It's okay to be able to say, I'm happy, I'm sad, and I'm angry, or I'm afraid, or I feel ashamed, but being able to take stock of what the intensity of that feeling and that emotion is key to understanding what you're feeling, why you're feeling that way, and how you can manage that in order to project what you want or to not project what you don't want. All right. So I want to stop for a second. I see we have a couple hands up. I don't know if those are just people who are still very enthusiastic about the $29,000 a year, or if we have a couple questions. So I want to see if anybody has questions. Kamrul, I see you have your hand up. Are you have a question for us?
I'm just excited about the $29,000 extra.
Ah, boy, I love it. Just excited about the $29,000. Well done. Very cool. If anybody has any questions they want to put in the chat box about what we're discussing so far, please do. Other than that, we'll go on and we'll start talking about the 4 dimensions of emotional intelligence. Right? So we view emotional intelligence in these 4 quadrants. All right. There's the self and the social, and then there's the recognition and the regulation. All right. And in the top left quadrant, you see the self-awareness piece. All right. That is your ability to recognize emotions within yourself. You own that. That is centered around you as an individual and is specific to recognition. It doesn't require any action other than awareness. And this is where you work to understand what your emotions are, what you're feeling at a particular moment, but also how you got there. You know, what are your triggers? What is it that causes you to go from a low intensity feeling to a high intensity feeling? You know, or do you hit that middle ground? This is especially important when you're dealing with very intense emotions like sadness or anger that can manifest themselves in some way where there's some outward action or there's some vocalization of it, right? So self-awareness is the first dimension. What I will tell you is that without the self-awareness ability in emotional intelligence, the other 3 are extraordinarily difficult to accomplish. Self-awareness is also the foundation of the concept, because if you don't know what you're feeling or why you're feeling a particular way, you can't manage what you don't know. Right. This is one of the first rules that we talk about. If any of you are management majors, you can't manage what you don't understand. This is why areas like data analytics are exploding right now, because we're looking at new ways to manage things based on data, based on information. Well, it's the same thing with ourselves, right? It's the same thing with us and who we are, is we can only manage what we know. And then that brings us to the second quadrant, right? Which is social recognition. That is social awareness, right? So once you've mastered, or once you've become proficient with self-awareness, the ability to understand other people's emotions, and then to be able to adjust yourself accordingly, right? And this is usually wrapped up in the concept of empathy. Now, what's really interesting is that when you look at soft skills, right, non-technical skill set within high performers and leaders, right, and if you read a lot of anybody takes a leadership course, you might hear about concepts like servant leadership, or you might hear about concepts of authentic leadership. A lot of those leadership techniques and those leadership skills are rooted in this concept of empathy. I have the ability as an empathetic person to understand what somebody else might be feeling, right? And social awareness stops there. It only goes as far as I understand and recognize what other people are feeling. I can kind of read the room, and I can understand if there's a lot of anger in the room, if there's sadness in the room, if there's happiness in the room. All right. So everybody clear on this so far? This is the recognition piece: self-recognition, social recognition, or self-awareness, social awareness. Is everyone good on this so far? Okay. Now we start moving down to the action piece. Now we know what we know. What actions do we take? And this is called regulation. So right off the bat, you have self-management, right? Your self-awareness then becomes your self-management. This is how you control, or you redirect, or you manifest certain feelings that you have into what you want to project and what you want to put out there. And that's not just, it's not as simple as saying, well, I have the self-management ability to turn off my emotions. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about becoming emotionless. We're talking about being aware of and able to control the manifestation of our emotions, right? Now, if we have a low level of happiness, right? If we're feeling satisfied, if we're feeling if we're just feeling good, right? To use one of the simple terminologies, if we're just feeling good, there's not a whole heck of a lot of self-management that needs to go on, right? Well, I mean, what do you really need to do if you're feeling a low level of happiness? You pretty much just need to go about your business and enjoy the fact that you're happy at that moment. There's not a whole heck of a lot you need to do. It's when you start getting into those higher intensity levels where you need to say, gosh, something just happened that triggered me to go from a low intensity to a medium or a high intensity. And that with happiness as well, something just got me elated, right? I'm going to use an example, right? You're in one of your classes and the professor is passing back the paper that you spent 3 weeks working on. And you've been stressed about this paper for so long. And I'm kind of dating myself here. Did they even pass out papers anymore with grades at the top of them, or is it all done on the computer? I'm only 40. But it was always handed back to me in paper form. I see a lot of people are smiling right now. I don't know if it's like a pity smile. It's like, oh, he's so cute. He still thinks that we get papers handed back to us. We don't even print anything anymore. We just email it in, and then when the grade appears, yeah, okay, I know what's going on here. You get your grade in your class, and you find out that you got an A on your paper. You now feel elated because you worked so hard on that paper. Why is self-management important at a time of elation at that particular moment? Well, it's possible that the person next to you didn't do so well. Or you want to be able to maintain focus for the next assignment. So you want to be aware of that emotion and be able to control that emotion so you can project confidence, you can project that you're happy, but inside you're really elated and you just can't wait to get home and call your parents. Right? That is an aspect of self-management, is also knowing when the right time and the right place is to let those emotions really show themselves. You really see that this is important when you're talking about emotions such as anger. Right? I'm going to give you everyone a little lifetime spoiler. In the professional working world, you're going to have frustrations. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have days where things don't go your way, and you might just feel disappointed, or you might feel annoyed or perturbed, but it is entirely possible that something will hit one of those emotional triggers and ratchet you up to angry, furious, one of those high intensity anger or sadness or shame situations. This is where the self-management practice becomes so important, is how do you compartmentalize that emotion and consider it in a positive way? Doesn't mean bottling it up. It doesn't mean ignoring it. It doesn't mean telling yourself, I'll stop feeling the way you're feeling. It's not invalidating these emotions. It's emotions, recognizing them, and then being able to manage the manifestation. I think we've all seen what happens when somebody does not practice self-management in a high intensity level of anger. It's usually not a positive situation, and it rarely makes things better. Can we generally agree on that? Right? We think that that's probably pretty true. And then we go into quadrant number 4, and that's social skills. All right. So this is the social piece. This is outside of the self, but it is a regulation skill. Is how do you manage your relationships? How do you build relationships with others? How do you maintain relationships with others? Your networking skills come into play here. What energy do you give off? What do other people say about you, think about you? When you walk into a room, are people excited to see you? Or is the feeling of, uh-oh, there goes the neighborhood, right? Social skills are your ability to take all of the social awareness and to be able to manage it and regulate it effectively. So that way you are building and maintaining relationships in a positive way. One quick disclaimer I didn't mention earlier is that when we are discussing these 4 different dimensions of emotional intelligence today, I am honing in on the professional application of these skills, right? I'm talking about in the workplace, I'm talking about in school, academically. I'm not talking about a personal manifestation of these things. The truth is, we can react much differently in a personal setting versus a professional setting. And there's no hard and fast rule that says where our emotions get more intense or less intense, right? Some people are more triggered by stresses at work than they are stresses at home. And other people, it's the inverse. And for some people, it's the same, right? So I'm specifically honing in on the professional application of the 4 dimensions of emotional intelligence. So before I leave this slide and we start getting more granular into each of the skills, does anybody have any questions? Macro level about these 4 dimensions of emotional intelligence. You can type it in the chat box, you can raise your hand, and you can unmute, however you want to go about it. And if there are none, then we'll just be able to keep moving on. Okay, we all feel pretty good. Give me a thumbs up if you're pretty good with where we are right now. Following along, okay? I got the thumbs up over there. I got thumbs up on video. You can use the thumbs up icon. All right. Seems like a lot of people are still with me. Okay, awesome. So we've covered a lot of stuff already. So now let's go more granular and let's start talking about some of the specifics, right? So self-awareness, that building block of emotional intelligence, right? This is how you perceive your emotions accurately and then be able to understand your triggers and how you react to different situations. What's really important to note about this is that there's really no time off from self-awareness. This is a 24/7 job. And that sounds exhausting. But the more you do it and the more you recognize when you act in some way out of emotion, you kind of put that into a file in your mind that helps you the next time you're in a similar situation where you can say, gosh, you know what? The last time I was in a situation like this is how it made me feel. This is what happened. So as a result, I'm going to take this different action. Or as a result, I'm going to avoid that situation entirely, or I'm going to be prepared with this or that knowledge. Okay, that is what self-awareness really comes down to, is being able to look at yourself and say, what am I feeling? Who am I? What am I doing about it? How am I going into these situations? Then you get into self-management, right? Self-management comes down to self-control. This is our actions. What do we do? What do we not do based off of where we perceive these emotions? So self-management, once again, this comes with practice. This comes with at-bats. I'm not going to take a show of hands on this one, but I think that any of us, if asked in a very honest moment, if there is a time that we wish we could have back, a certain regret because we don't like something we said, or we don't like a way that we acted, maybe to a coworker, maybe to a classmate, maybe to a family member or a loved one, right? Generally speaking, you will not get through life without saying something or doing something where a few seconds later you say, gosh, you know, I really wish I could have that one back. Self-management is oftentimes formed by mistakes, right? It's formed by when you do something or you say something that ends up creating a little bit of a regret. It may even put you onto that ashamed category of emotion, right? But you put that into that file, right? You save that file and you say, okay, now I know how this made me feel. So I'm going to react, or I'm going to approach it differently next time. Or saying, I think I handled that really well. I feel very proud of myself for the way I approached that. I'm going to take a similar approach going forward. All right, does that all make sense? That's what self-management is, and that is the manifestation of your self-awareness. Then our social awareness. Again, this is empathy. This is the ability to perceive and understand others. And the answer to that question, what is the most critical skill in social awareness? The most critical skill is empathy, is being able to, and not just being able to, but being willing to understand the emotions of others and to read other people. And when I say the willingness to, having the ability to do it is meaningless if you just don't care. You have to be willing to be empathetic to other people, which can also take a lot of effort. Anybody ever hear these people in their lives where they say, oh, I don't care what other people think? Right? How many of you have ever heard that? Show of hands, either on the screen or you can use the icon. How many of you have ever encountered somebody in your life where they've just said, well, I really don't care what other people think? How many of you ever heard that? I've seen a lot of heads nodding. Yeah, okay, absolutely. First of all, if somebody has to tell you that they don't care what other people think, they're telling you that because they care what you think. So right off the bat, you know that that is not true, right? Actions are what prove this, not words. So if somebody actually has to highlight that, they wear it almost like a badge of honor that they don't care what other people think. That means they really want you to know that they really do care what you think. All right. So the social awareness piece, again, is rooted in the empathy, the ability and the willingness to care about what other people think. In business, in work, in the professional life, the ability to understand what other people are feeling and to care what they think is a critical skill. Now, one of my favorite television shows, and I know I have a coworker who's within the earshot who's going to be really happy I'm dropping this reference on everybody, but I am a huge fan of the TV show Mad Men. And there is a line in, I think it's season 2 of Mad Men, where one of the characters who's in a leadership position is telling one of the junior people, and I quote, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but 50% of this business comes down to, I don't like that guy. Right? That's a direct quote from a really tense episode of Mad Men, but it speaks to social awareness. It's true. A lot of business does come down to that awareness, the ability to perceive the emotions of others, and relationship management, right? And that is the ability to cultivate those relationships and manage those relationships in a positive way that help you accomplish or achieve what it is that you want to get out of that relationship. All right. And so this is very much the cumulative result, because this is how you act outwardly. This is what you want the world to see of you. Relationship management also touches not just what you say or what you do, but anything that you put out into the universe. I know that sounds so abstract, right? But part of your relationship management and how you network and how you're perceived by other people can be seen in your digital footprint, what you put on social media, right? How many of you have that friend? Or maybe you are that friend, I don't know. But you can always tell when their emotions have been ratcheted up, because there's that Facebook post, or there's that Instagram post, or there's that TikTok video where you just look at it and say, uh-oh, they're something crawled under their skin and they are just letting the world have it today, right? That is a manifestation of relationship management and self-management in emotional intelligence. It's not just something that we have to do when we're together or when we're on a screen, but what you put out there, what you write in an email, what you write in a text, what you post on social media, the videos you create, all of this stuff. And a lot of it, especially if it's put on social media, may never go away, right? You're putting it out there. It can be captured. That can be immortalized, is an extension of your emotional intelligence. So when you think about what you're putting out there or what you're posting on social media or what you're writing in an email, I encourage you to take a moment to think about, is this projecting me and what I want other people to perceive of me? That is relationship management. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. I'm not going to ask how many of you are that friend. I'm not going to do that to you, but those of you who are, you know who you are. And I guarantee there's probably half of you thinking, I know exactly who I would think about for that. Everyone's got that one friend. All right. So bringing it all together, right? Social awareness, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship management, self-management. So the questions that we want to ask, that we want to discuss, is how do we achieve greater self-awareness, right? So we talked a little bit about this. This is the at-bats. This is the ability to take a moment, take stock of our emotions and how we got there. How do we exercise greater self-management? Again, through practice and experience. And self-management is not just something that comes about by looking at ourselves and how we react, but also how looking at how other people react. If you see somebody who carries themselves exceptionally well, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's a manager, maybe it's a member of your family, and you think to yourself, gosh, it seems like they always are in control of their emotions, or they carry themselves in a certain way that I really admire, I really respect. I want to emulate some of the things that that person does. That's self-management. On the flip side, if any of you have ever had that manager, that boss, or that coworker who flies off the handle at the slightest thing, or is always yelling at somebody, uh, it may put a little voice in the back of your head saying, I am never going to be like that. That is the opposite of the type of manager, employee, person I want to be. So sometimes seeing people do it wrong can impact your self-management and saying, I'm going to stay off the path that that person is on. What can we do to improve our social awareness, focus on our empathy? And if we're not quite sure how somebody else is feeling, and I know this sounds so overly simplistic, but it really is easy, just being able to ask, right? One of the things I am very for, and I'm not saying this just because they can hear me, but one of the things I'm very fortunate in at the company I work with is that we all check in on each other. Right? I'm on a team where we all genuinely do care how everyone else is doing. Are you okay? Are you having a good day? What's going on? Being in a support structure like that, or being the support structure like that, is incredibly valuable to just your professional life and the experience that you have in the workplace. And then what are the best practices for social management, right? So how do you manage that perception of you? And we talked a little bit about being aware of what you're putting out there, what you're giving off. And also, one of the hardest best practices for social management is asking for coaching. It's going to somebody that you work with closely, going to a mentor or a manager and saying, how do you think I'm perceived by other people? That is a very difficult question for somebody to be able to ask, because it's like you're exposing a nerve. Because if you hear something that you don't want to hear, you may not be prepared for that feedback. So this is a very high level of social management best practices, the ability to not just accept the feedback, but to actually seek it out from somebody that you trust. All right. So we covered how we achieve greater self-awareness. We've covered how we exercise greater self-management. We've talked a little bit about what we can do to improve our social awareness, and we've talked about the best practices for social management. So we've covered all four of these different quadrants and these manifestations of emotional intelligence. And there's a study that was done, and we're going to start to wrap up here and go into more Q&A. We went through the information a little bit quicker because I think we're doing Q&A at the end. But there's a really interesting discussion about the 6 emotional intelligence practices of great leaders. And for those of you who either see themselves being in a leadership role in the future, or they just want to be led by somebody who is a good leader who could help them become the best version of themselves, these are 6 specific practices that are EQ rooted, that you can look for in managers or companies that you go to work for in your internship experiences, and that I hope that those of you who go on to lead other people will try to emulate. Number 1 is be kind without being weak. There is this idea in certain circles, and it drives me absolutely crazy, that kindness is a form of weakness. How many of you have heard that platitude or that cliche before, where kindness is a form of weakness, or this person took my kindness as a weakness? Those two things are not mutually inclusive. It is entirely possible to be kind without being weak. As a matter of fact, I think that oftentimes people who are intentionally unkind are doing so because of weakness, because they're putting up a barrier, or they're not allowing themselves to be empathetic with other people, or because they perceive that it's a form of weakness. Caring about the emotions of others and then being able to manage yourself accordingly is a sign of strength. It's a sign of emotional strength. It's a sign of intelligence. It's a sign of wanting to, once again, be surrounded by the best versions of people, including the best version of yourself. Number 2, be strong without being harsh. This is a tremendous leadership trait, especially in areas of providing feedback. If you've ever had to lead or manage another person and you've had to give some difficult feedback, it can be difficult to find the words where you can make it clear what you're trying to convey without being either intentionally or unintentionally harsh, where it comes off as being insulting. This is a balancing act, and it takes sometimes a great deal of practice, but again, a great deal of empathy. So let me get in that. Let me get on the emotion side by a show of hands. How many of you have been in a situation where you've been a leader on a project, like a class project, or in a club or an organization, a sports team, a work environment, where you have had to give difficult feedback? You've had to have a difficult conversation with somebody on your team. A couple of you have. I want to ask the students who are here if anybody is willing to share a story without using names.
Chris,
If
I'd be
anybody
more than
was,
happy to. If you,
thank you, Seika. Thank you so much. Please do.
yeah, absolutely. So, I had to go through like a little bit of a process, and where we were given a goal set by our organization in order to complete like a certain amount of event planning and other goals towards like the end of 7 weeks. And I was like elected the head, so I had to manage all these committees. And at first, I understood like the whole kind without. I was worried, I can't be too kind, and I can't let things go off too lax, or else people won't respect my authority.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there was an instance where I had like one of my members on my team who really just was not pulling their weight. And in my mind I was like, okay, this is where you display strength, like this is where you have to you know
Yeah, come
tell
down
them.
on them.
Yes,
Right.
exactly, you have to
Yeah.
kind of be a little bit like harsh and stuff. So I had that, we'll say nicely, a discussion with them. And afterwards I saw no results, like I saw no change. And so I realized, I was frustrated, of course, and it's very hard, especially when it's your responsibility. Um, but afterwards, like I realized, you got to reevaluate how things happen. Maybe that was an instance with someone else that they needed someone to like tell them to you got to pull it together a little bit and be a little tough. But also there are instances where that isn't the case for everyone, and sometimes people respond to more of like a conversation. So that was my experience.
Absolutely. And Seika, first of all, I want to tell you how much I admire that example, not just because of its accuracy and its relevancy, but you also were willing to share with us an example of a time in which you learned through through an error the first time. You went back and said, I could probably approach this a little bit differently because that didn't have the result that I would have liked. And that demonstrates a tremendous amount of strength. And I really do appreciate and respect you sharing that with everybody. But yeah, 100%, absolutely. There's this idea that floats around out there that as leaders or as managers, if somebody's not pulling their weight or if somebody's not doing what's expected of them, that we have to come down on them because we have to show other people that we're in charge. And that's going to create respect. And that's going to mean that you command the room. But sometimes the most effective thing that you can do is just take that person aside one-on-one and say, listen, what's going on? Because just between you and me, there's a lot of concerns about what you're putting in here. And I just want to know why. Help me understand what's going on. Because if something's going on with you where I can empower you or I can help remove a roadblock, I want to do that. But you also can't not address it, because then the person just gets away with it, or the person is suffering. They have some sort of an issue, and because you never ask them and they never feel comfortable bringing it to you, it just perpetuates until the project ends, sometimes not successfully, right? And I ask this question a lot in interviews. I've probably done somewhere in the range of between 5,000 and 7,000 different interviews in my 15 years in talent acquisition. Phone interviews, face-to-face interviews, internal, external, you name it. And anytime I'm asking questions about leadership, especially with recent college graduates or with interns, anytime I'm asking a question about leadership, I'll often ask if you've ever been in an example or an experience where you have had somebody on your team who was underperforming or not pulling their weight. Because, spoiler alert, if you've ever been on a team or if you ever are on a team, inevitably you will have somebody who is not pulling what you believe is their full load. It is going to happen. And furthermore, it might be you. All right. And I don't say that to be harsh, because it's been me. right? I've been there where something just hasn't been clicking for me, and I needed to have that conversation. I needed somebody to come to me and say, "Gosh, here's the perception. What's going on?" And I've needed to change course, right? There's a great question here by Enrique about, is emotional intelligence a Western civilization topic, or does each culture have different views on emotional intelligence? I think that's a phenomenal question. And that's something that I want to dive a little bit further into, because I will definitely say that I think a lot of concepts of emotional intelligence, or at least some of the source material where I draw it from, is probably a little bit more Western, right? It kind of focuses a little bit more on that. Now, I think that it's still relevant no matter what culture you're working with. But let's dive into that question for a moment before we finish up with this list. I can say confidently that emotional intelligence, right, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management, will be effective and will be an important skill no matter what culture you're dealing with, especially if you're working in a business environment or a professional environment that has an international component to it. But what I think is important is, with that social awareness piece, understanding other cultures and customs, and being empathetic and receptive, not just accepting, but embracing of other cultures, how they communicate, how they perceive emotionality. That is a major, major component of social awareness. It's not just understanding how somebody might be feeling, or how somebody might be reacting, or how those emotions might be manifesting, but to be able to recognize this individual is from a different culture than I am, and the culture may also be affecting how they're reacting or how they feel about it. And I need to be aware of and empathetic, and I have to be willing to embrace those differences in order to get the best relationship with this person that I'm capable of. Does that make sense? So that is a phenomenal gold star question, and I'm so happy you brought that up. And there's actually, as a matter of fact, I want to add that component into the presentation going forward, because I really think that hits on an important topic. So I absolutely love that. We still have a few more of this list to go through, and then I still want to have some more Q&A. We're quickly approaching the 5 o'clock time frame. We've already been kind of hanging out for about 45 minutes already. So confident without being cocky. The ability to express and demonstrate confidence is a manifestation of emotional intelligence, right? Even if you don't necessarily feel confident going into a particular situation, the ability to say, you know what, even though I may not be at my best right now, I want to demonstrate that I belong, right? And that confidence is not perfection. You don't have to go into a situation feeling like you're the smartest person in the room or the best person in the room, but you have to be confident in your own ability. You have to be confident in your ability to listen, to learn, and to project the best version of you possible. There is another extreme to that, and that is cockiness. And that is somebody whose social management is to project themselves as so confident because they believe that will make other people respect them more. There's a lot of pitfalls to cockiness. First of all, as a presentation of emotion and from a networking point of view, it turns a lot of people off right off the bat. Somebody who demonstrates a tremendous amount of cockiness can oftentimes cause barriers to be put up and other people to just shut a door before they can even get to know them, right? Even if it's just something that they're putting out there because they think that that's what the crowd wants, right? Cockiness can put a lot of people off. The other thing is that somebody who's too cocky going into a situation, if they then turn around and they don't deliver on that cockiness, they don't back it up, they don't put their money where their mouth is, use whatever cliche you want to use, that perceived fall is much greater. It may erode the opportunities at future trust, and you may be less likely to be empathetic to that person when they have that fall, because you might look at them and say, if they weren't so cocky, I'd probably feel bad for them. Right? So be confident without being cocky. Now, confidence is also a hot topic anytime you're going into an interview. And I want to give one of my favorite pieces of interview advice to everybody, especially as you prepare for whether it's internship interviews or your full-time jobs after college or on-campus jobs, is when it comes to confidence, before you can convince an employer that you're the best person for the job, you have to convince yourself. Right? So you need to almost interview yourself. This is where the SWOT analysis is so important, right? For my business majors out there, you hear about the SWOT analysis oftentimes in terms of a company, right? What are the company's strengths? What are the company's weaknesses? Personally, I think the SWOT analysis is at its most effective when you're using it to self-assess and to become self-aware, right? The SWOT analysis is a tool for that first quadrant of emotional intelligence. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are some of the opportunities that are available in my environment? And what are some of the threats that I need to manage? Right. So being able to do that and then taking a look at a job, an assignment, an opportunity, and looking at how your strengths match up with that. Use that to convince yourself that you belong in that room and that you would hire you if you were interviewing you. If you can get to that point, it's much easier to convince somebody else that they should hire you for a particular job. So convince yourself first. Be confident without being cocky. Number 4, be positive without being unrealistic. An emerging topic I'm seeing on social media, as a matter of fact, I was reading something about it this morning on LinkedIn, is this concept of toxic positivity. This idea that there are people out there who are so ultra positive that their response to everything is, well, it'll get better. Well, you'll just toughen up, or just smile and you'll be fine. Go for a walk and all that negativity will wash away. I mean, no, sometimes people are really dealing with stuff. And they don't need to hear platitudes, and they don't need that over positivity thinking that's just going to wash away all the negativity. Being positive and having a good outlook, not being cynical, being able to look at things and saying, well, you know what, I can affect this in a good way. I can have a positive outcome, but without being so over the top that you start becoming unrealistic, is a very critical balancing act. One of my mentors in college, actually, is the gentleman who was my motivational speaking coach for many years, said the 10 most powerful 2-letter words in the English language are, if it is to be, it is up to me. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. It speaks to ownership and positive mindset. But you also want to make sure, especially when you're dealing with other people, when you're socially managing, is to be realistic with them, but also to be realistic with yourself. It's great if you expect a lot from yourself, but also you need to be aware of your limits. And it's great to test your limits, but you don't want to stretch yourself so thin that you break. Does that make sense? Everyone's clear on that so far? We're good? Okay. Model behaviors without being preachers. This is the concept of when we talk about the concept of hypocrisy, right? Do as I say, not as I do. Actions really do speak louder than words. I'm throwing so many obnoxious cliches at all of you, and I apologize for that, but that is the best way I can compartmentalize this idea. Model behaviors. If you are strong in emotional intelligence and you want to project, if your social management is to project that level of confidence, that empathy, that being welcome, being somebody that people can come talk to, somebody that people trust, then the actions are what's going to demonstrate that. And saying it is not going to. This goes back to what I said earlier about the people who say, I don't care what other people think. If they're telling you that, they're preaching that, but their actions betray them. So model the behaviors that you want to put out into the world. Use your emotional intelligence to show people how you act and let them follow your lead because they see that you're somebody they want to emulate. And last but not least, emotionally intelligent leaders are willing to do anything for their teams, right? This goes back to that concept of servant leadership. The best leaders in the world see themselves as individuals who empower the people on their teams to be the best version of themselves. And that is how the team achieves a greater level of success. Leaders who lack emotional intelligence are the ones who see their subordinates as a means to their ends. Please don't be that kind of leader. Be the kind of leader who seeks to make the people around them better and is willing to do what it takes to make sure that their team is successful. And sometimes that means providing difficult feedback, having challenging conversations, being strong without being harsh, etc. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, brilliant. So we've been going for just shy of an hour now. And I know we have 90 minutes scheduled. I don't necessarily anticipate we're going to need all that time, but I'm going to end the slideshow and I am going to stop the screen share and bring everybody back into this room. And I want to offer up some Q&A and some discussion topics if anybody has anything they'd like to elaborate on. If anybody wants to share anything, what resonated with them in the presentation? Was there anything that really hit home for you? Is there something that you learned? Carrie, why don't you kick us off?
First of all, that was amazing.
Oh, thank
And
you.
there's so much more to the topic, but that was amazing. But You said something that I just wanted to call out, and then I'm not gonna, I promise students I will be quiet. But I want to call something out because I think it's so important to hear, especially because I know a lot of these students that are with us tonight are probably in internship searches, right? Trying to think about an internship, trying
A
to
lot
think
of heads are
over the summer.
nodding. Yeah.
You said when you were talking about confidence, that confidence is not perfection. And I just love that. I just love it because I think that our students, first of all, our students are super intelligent. They're go-getters. I mean, this is the management school. So we've got a lot of great students in this school. But I think that I've witnessed as an internship director that sometimes the students put a lot of pressure on themselves when they get into the internship to be perfect. And that the only way the employer is going to see the value that they're bringing is if they never make mistakes or they don't ask stupid questions or they, could you just maybe speak to that just a tiny bit about, if you put yourself sort of in the shoes of a student, they're trying to be great on the internship, they're trying to make an impression, and just the difference, I think, between the confidence that and the value that they bring without being perfect. And I will just tell you that throughout my whole college experience, my undergrad and my advanced degrees, I struggled a lot with trying to be perfect all the time. And there were times when it paid off, and there were other times when it really didn't. And you learn over time that perfection is a myth, but I think it is still a pressure point for a lot of our students.
Yep. And listen, guilty as charged. Right. One of the common pieces of feedback that I get from managers and mentors whom I respect a great deal is don't be so hard on yourself. Right. I still do that. But it's interesting, Carrie, I want to touch on the question that you asked, and I want to go specific to internships. And I'm not going to speak about this abstractly. I'm actually going to give specifics. I'm going to talk about the internship program that I run here at Crestron. And last year, for example, we hired 80 interns. Next year, we're going to hire upwards of 100, right? We hired 80 interns, and we've already had 24 of them start full-time careers with us after graduation, just in the past year alone, right? Which is really a tremendous number. It shows how much value we get from this program. But when I'm speaking to managers at the end of the internship program, I mean, the managers are giving me their feedback and filling out their evaluations. The ones that we're focused on converting, I'll tell you the feedback I never get is, oh yeah, they were just great day one. I didn't even need to do anything with them. They knew everything the first day they were here. I showed them where their desk was. I showed them where the restroom was, and that was pretty much it. They did the rest on their own. Never happened, and never will, right? The best feedback I get about the interns I've worked with, and this is not just a restaurant thing. I've probably worked with between 600 and 800 interns in my professional career. The ones who went on to be the most successful and the ones that the organization prioritized were the ones that demonstrated learning from first day to last day, right? And my favorite piece of feedback to get from managers about an intern is they ask so many great questions. Or sometimes they just ask so many questions. To ask those questions, you know where those questions come from? Gosh, I don't really know. I'm going to go get that answer, right? Let me ask that question, not because there's this misconception that if you ask a question, it's demonstrating a lack of knowledge. No, it's demonstrating a willingness to learn. Those are two completely different things. And that's what an internship is. It's a learning opportunity, right? I'm actually in the middle of writing another presentation that I hope to deliver in the future, and a paper I'm going to write along with it. And it talks about the most important phrases in the professional world that we need to learn how to say. And it dispels all the platitudes about let's peel back the onion and run it up the flagpole, all that other stuff that you hear. And it's real impactful stuff. And one of the things is learn how to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. That is the example of you don't need to be perfect, but man, it is so great if you have a willingness to learn. That also speaks to the confidence without cockiness, right? Because people who are cocky might not be willing to ask that question because they don't want to put a crack in this facade that they have of being so prepared and so ready and so knowledgeable. right? No, actually, you show more confidence by asking questions than by never asking and getting it wrong down the line. Sega, you have a question. I see your hand is up. I would love to hear your question.
Yeah, and I definitely want to reiterate to the other fellow students to get their questions in too, so we don't take up all your time.
No
But
worries.
is there such thing as I guess like too much self-evaluation, I guess. Like there's self-awareness and like managing it, but I know sometimes like as a student and when you're kind of worked up about these things or overthinking, you can kind of go down like a spiral of,
Yeah. Yeah,
emotions.
there's always such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? Because let's talk about the risks of getting so in the weeds with self-awareness that it starts to become unhealthy, starts to become a problem, right? What does unhealthy self-awareness looks like? It looks like you are nitpicking every single one of your perceived flaws, and it erodes your confidence. Or it looks like paralysis analysis, where you spend so much time trying to understand yourself or to be self-aware that you don't let yourself just be, right? And I think that that's important to note as well. Is there such a thing as too much of any of this? Is there such a thing as too much social management? Let's talk about that for a second. Yes, there's such a thing as too much social management, because if you overmanage your social status or how you are perceived socially, you come off as a phony, or you come off as putting up one of those facades. So this is where so much of EQ is balance, right? Is a balancing act. And so you want to be able to manage the perception of you socially by building your network and managing relationships, but not at the expense of your authenticity. Not if it means that you're not being who you truly are, and not if it means that you are trying to be what you think somebody else wants you to be, right? So I often say, be the best version of your authentic self. And that's what you want to project. And those are the relationships that you want to manage. And if that's not good enough for somebody, or if somebody doesn't like the authentic you, then you have to ask yourself, how badly do you really want a relationship with that person? Right? Because emotional intelligence and social management, it's not being everything to everybody, right? It's being the what you believe is the best version of you, and understanding your emotions to a point where you're putting what you believe is your best product out there. Does that make sense? Seika, outstanding question. Carrie, you said this group was sharp, but I think you may have even underplayed it a little bit. These questions are outstanding. Like, I'm going to start adding slides to this presentation. This is going to be a 2.5 hour talk pretty soon. Let's see, Sydney.
Thank you. So first, just thank you for the presentation and sharing this information with us. It really was just so insightful. And actually, I wanted to comment on something that you just said about how it seems like EQ is all about balance. And I noticed that in your slides that it's kind of doing this without that. And I'm kind of curious about what happens when you're out of balance. How do you make that correction? So let's say it's not your first day at the internship, but you're maybe a few weeks in, or you're going through the second half of your term in a club. How would you start to correct, like, okay, that confidence was perceived as cockiness. How do I rebalance or recalibrate?
Yeah, Sydney, what a fantastic question, right? So right off the bat, let's revisit that self-awareness piece. The ability to say, okay, you know what? I think that came off wrong, or I think I was just out of balance. Congratulations, you've just checked the first box, because you've just demonstrated that self-awareness piece. You've recognized the fact that you were out of balance, right? So now what you do when you ask yourself the question, well, how am I going to go forward, right? What will I do differently? That's self-management, all right? So yeah, it hits quadrant 1, it hits quadrant 2. Social awareness. How did other people perceive? If I thought I was out of balance, did anybody else notice it? Right? By the way, this happens a lot. Is you perceive something within yourself. You might be giving a speech. This actually in public speaking, this comes up a lot, where somebody gets done with a speech who does a lot of talks. And by the way, I do this all the time. And they say, well, I messed up this, I messed up this, I messed up this. I wanted to say this, but I didn't get to this slide, I didn't get to this point. Do you know who has no clue that I didn't get to that? The audience. They have no idea. It's not like they had a script, right? They haven't seen the movie before, or maybe you just changed it up, right? So ask yourself, I perceive myself as out of balance. Do I think anybody else noticed? And if so, Then is there a social management, now we're in quadrant 4, that I need to enact? Is it something that was kind of egregious where I feel the need to pull somebody aside and say, hey, listen, what you saw back there wasn't me? Where you want to apologize or make amends? Or is it something where you want to move past it? Maybe you make a joke about it and then you just re-demonstrate what you believe is the appropriate balance. I think at the heart of it, the biggest piece of advice I'll give you, Sydney, and everybody else, is that when you fall out of balance, recognize it's okay. It's okay. You're again, I use this a lot. Spoiler alert, you're going to fall out of balance. I do it on almost a weekly basis because emotions are real and you can't always control them, right? So the self-awareness, just start at step 1, self-awareness. I felt myself get out of balance. That wasn't exactly how I would have liked to have reacted to that situation. Step 2, self-management. What do I want to do differently? What am I going to learn from this? How might I be able to go forward differently so that way I get better from this experience and I allow it to make me stronger instead of allowing it to tear me down? All right. Social awareness. How might me being out of balance have been perceived by others, if it was perceived at all? Social management. Is there anything I need to do with those relationships based off of what I've just perceived? And understand that it's okay and don't beat yourself up over it. It's a great question. Is it Nilda?
Yes.
Great.
So we kind of talked a little bit just now about how to self-manage and like figure out how we can accomplish that balance. But what are your recommendations for if because we probably will at some point in our careers, if we encounter and work with team members who seem to be a little bit more deficient in EQ, and how to say that we tackle those situations?
Right. You just walk up to them and you hand them this book and you say, here, read this. I think you really need it. No, don't do that. I think, again, this is where empathy comes in, right? This is where if you, what you're talking about, Nilda, the question you just asked me is based off of social awareness, right? I am aware of the fact I perceive that a member of my team, somebody in my club, somebody in this class, somebody I'm working with may be struggling with emotional intelligence. So the ability to pull them aside and say, tell me a little bit about what you're feeling right now. Right? I mentioned this earlier with how I am with my team, right? Just being able to check in with that person and say, how are you feeling right now? Oh, fine. You get that a lot. Oh, I feel fine. It's like, okay. It just, maybe this is just my perception, but it seemed like something was bothering you, or it seemed like something was kind of, was kind of affecting the way you were speaking or the way you were acting. It just seemed like it was different for you. And I just want to make sure you're okay. You're coming at it from a place of empathy. You're not being accusatory, saying you're a different person today than you were yesterday, and this is bad, so we have to correct this. You're not coming at it that way. You're coming at it from a place of true authenticity and empathy, and saying, "Oh, I'm here for you, and I want to understand." And there's this technique in management, often associated with giving difficult feedback, that can be used here. And again, I think it's a little cliche, but it has a place here, and that's the concept of feel, felt, found. And feel, felt, found is when you approach a conversation like this one, where you're demonstrating that empathy and you're trying to almost subliminally provide an emotional intelligence lesson to somebody else and saying, yeah, I know exactly how you feel. I have felt that way before. Here's what I found works. Feel, felt, found. And being vulnerable and offering your own experiences to somebody and showing them that you care, but also that you understand, is really very powerful. Right? It helps break down barriers. Now, it's entirely possible that that person's just going to keep a barrier up and say, no, I swear I'm good, right? And at that point, you don't need to continue to push the issue if you don't want to, but just disengage, knowing that, okay, this person understands that at least I'm concerned about them. And if they ever are feeling something, maybe they feel more comfortable coming to me, right? So it can be difficult trying to specifically address EQ with somebody else. But the best thing that you can do, this goes back to model behaviors without being a preacher, right? That was what we looked on those six lessons for a high EQ leader. Is if you perceive somebody is struggling with their emotional intelligence and you want to help them get better, sometimes the best thing that you can do is model the behaviors instead of trying to tell them about theirs. It's a great question. We have a few more minutes for a couple others. And then if nobody minds, just because this has been such an engaged group and a fun group, I would love to grab a group photo. Nobody minds. Neil, did you have another question?
I do have a follow-up
Yes.
question.
Awesome.
So same thing, but how do you approach it when it tends to be your superiors that might be doing this?
Ooh, okay. Managing up, right? How do you approach it when you're dealing with somebody who may be in a position of power, influence, or leadership with you? Um, there are so many variables here. There are so many it depends, right? Because it can depend on how that person is at taking feedback. Again, I'm very fortunate where I am right now, in which I work with leaders and I work with managers who I feel comfortable being able to go to them and say, listen, I just want to revisit this topic. I took it this way. I don't know if that was the way you intended it, but let's hash through it. Or, hey, I didn't quite agree with that particular course of action, right? Not everyone has that luxury, and I understand that. So the idea again is to go back to those quadrants, right? Go back to those 4 steps. You're dealing with a manager who maybe is struggling with emotional intelligence. Start with your own self-awareness. How is it making me feel? How is it affecting my emotions? Do I find myself going to work being angry, anxious, ashamed, or do I feel that this person is ratcheting up my intensity of my emotions, right? And then self-manage. Okay, I understand that this individual has this effect on me, that this is a trigger point for me. So now I know, and now I know how it makes me feel, and I know that I need to take a certain approach to interactions with this individual. Okay, then you start going into how you manage that other person. Again, modeling the right behavior, being able to provide clear feedback. You're not being weak, right? Being able to say, gosh, I'm kind of getting this, I'm feeling this from this particular situation, this particular interaction. Maybe we could look at another way of doing this. Maybe we could look at another way of dealing with this situation, right? Modeling the right behaviors. The challenge with EQ when it comes to a superior is because if that person is in a position of influence and they are not interested in trying to improve or trying to get better, then you have to go back to those first 2, right? The self-awareness and the self-management piece, and also ask yourself if it's a healthy environment for you to be in. But what you often find is that just trying to have a very honest, authentic conversation with a manager in private, right? Being able to have that conversation and say, what, let me tell you a little bit about how I think this might be better. If is it okay if I provide this feedback? I think that's a very powerful tool. If that person reacts negatively to you just saying, I'd like to take this different approach, or help me understand how you feel about this. This is that social awareness piece, right? When we had that conversation, or when we were dealing with that particular very stressful project, help me understand what was going through your head and how you felt, because that way I want to be able to understand and be able to react accordingly. It's a difficult thing to do. We could probably take a whole nother hour discussing managing up. It is, anytime you're managing a supervisor, or a manager, or a superior, it's a loaded topic. But this is also why it's important for you, from a social management standpoint, to look at what type of relationship you want to build with your boss, or with your manager, or with a supervisor, or with somebody in a position of influence, and strive to keep that relationship managed in a positive way. A lot of times also, it's just simple things like avoiding drama, avoiding gossip, right? Kind of staying above the fray is, I think, one of the terms that gets used a lot in that social management piece when you're talking about managing relationship with a boss. Because people who are perceived as a gossip, or people who are perceived as taking sides, or they're talking behind my back, a lot of times, even if that's not true, that social awareness piece, that perception, can end up doing more harm. So it's a tricky topic for sure. Nilda, what a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Great questions. Do we have any others before we wrap up with our group photo? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for spending the last hour and 15 minutes with me to discuss emotional intelligence, EQ, and self-awareness, and self-management, social awareness, and social management. This was a lot of fun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording in just a moment, and then just kind of casually grab a picture with everybody. But thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. I love speaking on these topics. And I can't wait to see what the students at UB are going to do next. You are all so impressive. So thank you all for having me. Let's just